This happened in the fall of 2021, when I was living alone in a rented townhouse in southern Illinois. It was my first time ever living by myself, and even though I was technically an adult, 27, with a full-time job and a stable routine, I still had a lot of nerves about the idea. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I thought the silence and solitude might help me process everything. The townhouse was part of a small row of identical units, kind of plain, but clean and quiet, tucked away in a sleepy cul-de-sac, just off a rural highway. The neighborhood had that sterile, suburban vibe, lots of beige vinyl siding, trimmed hedges, wind chimes, and mailboxes with family names stenciled on them. Mostly older folk, but a few young families. I didn't know any of my neighbors well, but I liked it that way. I kept to myself, but almost right away, I noticed one person who stood out from the rest. He lived 3 doors down, a tall, heavy-set man, probably in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a weird habit of standing outside his house at night, sometimes pacing or smoking, sometimes doing nothing at all, just staring. I'd pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m., and there he'd be, leaning against his porch rail, or just standing at the edge of his driveway, facing the street. He never waved, never smiled. He just stared, even if I looked directly at him. I tried to ignore it. A couple of times I mentioned it to friends, or my mom, and they said maybe he was just a night owl or had insomnia. But there was something unsettling about him, like he was always watching, but never participating. It wasn't just that he was there. It was stillness. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't shift his weight. He just stood there, like a statue. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the more time passed, the more that gnawing feeling in my gut grew. Then, the noises started. It was around mid-September when I first heard it. I had just gotten home from work after a long shift. I worked late hours managing inventory at a distribution center. Usually got in around 10:30 p.m., exhausted, grabbed a bite to eat, and crashed. That night, I fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up to a sound I can only describe as metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought I had dreamed it, but then I heard it again. A long, slow, creaking noise, like an old gate opening. My bedroom was on the first floor at the back of the unit, and I had a sliding glass door with vertical blinds that led to a small, fenced-in backyard. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps, soft, crunching sounds, like someone walking slowly across gravel. My entire backyard was lined with decorative rock instead of grass, so you could hear every footstep clearly. These weren't animal sounds. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I didn't have a weapon, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand, just in case, which, at the time, felt kind of ridiculous. I crouched by the edge of the window and peeked through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. The motion light wasn't on, which meant either they were out of range or had come in a different way. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm, asked for my address, and told me officers were en route. I stayed crouched in the dark, barely breathing. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my front window. I got up, opened the door, and met the 2 officers outside. I explained everything, what I heard, what time it started. One of them walked around the back, while the other stayed with me and asked a few questions. The officer in the yard came back and said the gate was closed, and there were no signs of tampering, but he'd write up a report, just in case. They didn't see anyone. No footprints, no damage. Basically, no crime. One of them actually said, "Probably just a raccoon," and gave me a look that clearly said, "You're wasting our time." I didn't argue. They left after about 10 minutes. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I went outside to check the backyard myself. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a flat stone, about the size of a paperback book, wedged under the bottom edge of the wooden fence gate. I hadn't noticed it before. The gate had a heavy spring that made it swing closed automatically, but the stone looked like it had been placed there specifically to stop it from closing all the way. It was subtle, like something someone would do if they wanted to come back later and slip in without making noise. I picked up the rock and tossed it across the yard. I called the police again, told them what I'd found. They said they'd note it in the report, but again, there wasn't much they could do. I asked if they could talk to any of the neighbors or check for cameras. They said no. Unless a crime was committed, they couldn't investigate. I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 nights later, it escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of my back door handle turning. The handle rattled gently at first, like someone testing it, then a harder jiggle, like someone trying to open it. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. My mouth went dry. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the police again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway, out of view. I didn't have a gun or a dog, just that stupid kitchen knife. My motion light clicked on, and through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was a man. He didn't run or try to hide. He just stood there. The same 2 officers showed up again. This time they actually found footprints in the gravel, big ones, heading right up to the door. But again, since no entry had been made, there wasn't enough to go on. They promised to patrol the area more often and told me to keep my doors locked. The next day, I installed cameras, one above the back door, another above the front porch. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room, lights off, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:14 a.m. came and went. Nothing. Then, at 2:23, the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He walked in through the gate, like he knew exactly how to move to avoid the motion sensor until the last second. He was tall, broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans, gloves. He walked up to the door, looked up directly at the camera, and smiled. A slow, stretched-out grin. Then he backed up, still staring, and disappeared into the dark. I called the police again. They came back, watched the clip, and admitted, yes, it was unsettling. But since he didn't break in, didn't damage property, and didn't appear armed, there was nothing they could do. They wouldn't even ask the guy down the street to check his doorbell cam. I begged them. They said their hands were tied. That night, I packed a bag and slept at a hotel. When I came back the next day, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door, 2 high up and 2 low, like someone had crouched down and just rested their hands there for a while, staring in. I moved out a week later, broke my lease, forfeited my deposit. I didn't care. I couldn't stay there another night. The final straw was the note I found wedged in my mailbox the day I left. It was handwritten, in small, cramped letters, on lined notebook paper. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one last report. The officer I spoke to at that time looked genuinely disturbed by the note. He promised they'd do a wellness check on the neighborhood. But it was too late. I never went back. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook. It was from a girl named Kayla. She said she was the new tenant who had moved into the unit after me. Her message said, "Hi, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here. Did you ever have someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night. And last night, someone knocked on the glass door around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I didn't reply. I didn't want to know what happened next. This happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, and I usually stick to late-night shifts. The roads are quieter, and the tips are better. But there's a trade-off. Every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I've always thought of myself as careful. I've dealt with my fair share of strange passengers, but nothing and I mean nothing, came even close to how bizarre what I'm about to tell you was. I didn't have a dash cam at the time, and that night is the main reason I installed one afterward. It started off normal enough. Just me, driving, and the occasional weird sound my car would make. I've got this beat-up 2005 Volvo, but it's reliable as hell. The streets were literally deserted, which, like I said earlier, I actually preferred. Sometime after 2 a.m., I got a request from a nearby convenience store. It seemed harmless at first, but for some reason, I got this strange feeling in my gut about it. You ever get that feeling where something feels off, but you can't explain why? That's exactly what hit me as I drove up. Before I even saw the guy, I knew why I had that feeling. The convenience store I was pulling up to was closed. All the lights were off, and there wasn't a single car in the parking lot. As I got closer, I saw him. I made sure to drive slowly so I could get a good look. He was pacing outside the store, wearing this ratty hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. I'm not exaggerating. There was literally a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he thought someone was following him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I probably should have canceled the ride and driven away. I even hovered my finger over the cancel button. But for whatever reason, I didn't. I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without saying a word. I regretted that decision the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most passengers either scroll on their phones or stare out the window. Not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rear view mirror. Not blinking, not looking away, just staring straight at me. I tried not to look back, but I caught his eyes a couple of times. He looked angry, which made it even more unsettling. I tried to ignore it, and turned on the radio to break the silence. I don't even remember what station it was, but the moment the music started, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and a little raspy, and I could tell right away he was a smoker. It caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel slightly. I resisted the urge to look at him in the mirror and did what he said, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I didn't say anything. We drove in silence for a while. I hoped he'd just stay quiet until we reached his stop, but then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I'd ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out an awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep things light, but he didn't react at all. He just leaned back and muttered something under his breath that I couldn't hear. Then he started talking about how he used to be an Uber driver and how he quit after some punks stole things from his car. He was slurring his words, so I couldn't catch everything, but I got the general idea. I glanced in the mirror once or twice while he talked, and I realized he was smiling the entire time. That was incredibly unsettling. A normal person doesn't smile while talking about something like that. He ended his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That comment was what really got to me. That's when I stopped seeing him as just some unstable drug addict and started thinking of him as an actual threat. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my thoughts were racing. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline. But he wouldn't stop talking. He kept rambling about nonsense, some of it disturbing, some of it just incoherent. I couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone. I don't think it was me. He began hinting that he'd done something terrible, saying over and over, "I didn't mean it," followed by frantic apologies. I didn't respond. I was afraid that if I did, he might do something. I didn't know what he'd done or what he was capable of, and I didn't want to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he suddenly snapped out of his haze and yelled that I'd missed the turn. I hadn't. The GPS clearly showed we were on the right route, but I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over, so I did. My hands were shaking. I just wanted it to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it slowly drove past, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down, trying to stay out of sight. I glanced back and saw him lying almost completely flat across my back seat, his eyes closed. I snapped my head forward before he noticed, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed like that for an uncomfortably long time. I wanted to tell him to get out, but I decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me I'd gotten lucky. Before I could react, he opened the door and disappeared into the night. I ended my shift early after that. I was shaken and didn't feel safe driving anymore. A few weeks later, I came across something on my phone that made my stomach drop. According to a news article, a convenience store had been robbed the same night I picked up that passenger. It was only 2 blocks from where I'd picked him up. It still makes me sick knowing how close I was to a dangerous criminal. Someone who could have seriously harmed me if he'd chosen to. I'm honestly afraid to contact the police about it. I try to avoid law enforcement for personal reasons I won't get into, and I'm not even sure my report would help at this point. Either way, I'm a lot more cautious about who I let into my car. I used to live in the city. The urban lifestyle was always what I imagined for myself. I won't go into details, but after an extremely traumatic experience, I couldn't even tolerate small noises anymore. I started to hate noise altogether. My psychiatrist told me I'd developed a rare case of phonophobia, that pins and needles feeling you get when your foot falls asleep. It was like that, but in my chest. Constant. Like my body was always bracing for something that never came. Every car horn, every slamming door felt like a shock straight to my nerves. I couldn't live like that anymore. About 3 years ago, I found a cabin hidden deep in the Pacific Northwest. I don't want to say exactly where, for reasons you'll understand soon. But all I'll say is this. It was somewhere in Oregon. It seemed perfect. Very few neighbors. No traffic. Barely any cell service. What really sold me, though, was the lack of noise. It was just me and the peace and quiet. For the first time in months, I thought I might actually feel safe. The cabin itself was small, but cozy. To be fair, it was exactly what the listing had promised. You could tell it had been built to last, with thick wooden beams and a sturdy stone fireplace. When I first walked in, it smelled like pine and old books. You know that earthy scent that's oddly comforting, like one of those old cabin-style bed and breakfasts, especially if you've ever gone skiing. The nearest neighbor lived about a 10-minute walk away, down a narrow dirt path. I didn't meet her right away, though. For the first few days, I just soaked in the silence. I'd wake up to birds instead of sirens, and at night the only thing I heard was the wind brushing through the trees. It felt like the entire world had hit pause, and I could finally breathe again. I did all my work on my laptop, so there really wasn't any need to connect with the outside world beyond that. About a week after I moved in, there was a knock at the door. The cabin obviously didn't have a doorbell, so knocks were something I'd have to get used to. I opened the door, expecting it to be my neighbor, and it was. She was a moderately older woman carrying a basket of preserves, like she'd stepped straight out of a Hallmark movie. She introduced herself as Michelle, and told me she lived about 10 minutes down the trail. That didn't sound far until you factored in how dense the woods were. I mean, you could get turned around out there, just looking for firewood. She was in her late 60s, with oddly long gray hair and piercing blue eyes that made you feel like she could see right through you. She wasn't rude, exactly, more blunt. She welcomed me to the woods and extended the basket toward me like she fully expected me to take it. I didn't really have a choice. She was practically shoving it into my hands. I know that sounds hospitable, but her vibe felt off, if that makes sense. I took it almost impulsively, though I'll admit I'd never been treated that way by a neighbor before. It wasn't anything extreme, just unfamiliar. I thanked her, and she looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something else. I honestly didn't know what else to say, so I just smiled. She kept staring at me, which only reinforced my suspicion that she didn't interact with many people. Eventually, she spoke. These were her exact words. and I'll never forget them. Always Uskas, keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe. That's not something a normal person says. It sounded less like advice and more like a warning, like she was reciting rules from some kind of handbook. I nodded, smiled, and turned to go back inside. After I shut the door, I stood there in silence, waiting to hear her footsteps walk away. She didn't leave for a good 45 seconds, which was probably the strangest part of the entire interaction. Despite the weirdness, I did appreciate the gesture. She seemed reclusive, but not unfriendly. The kind of person who'd help if you asked, but wouldn't pry. I told myself it was reassuring to know someone lived nearby, even if I never planned on needing her. I didn't even look inside the basket. I just set it down in the living room and forgot about it. That night, there was a thunderstorm, which is rare for Oregon, but it does happen. I lit a few candles and curled up on the couch with a book, trying to ignore the fact that the power kept flickering. Some people might find that kind of isolation terrifying, but I loved it. My brain wasn't alarmed by the storm. The thunder didn't bother me at all. In fact, listening to it was soothing. That storm was what made me realize I might actually be okay out there. Of course, that peaceful feeling didn't last. A few hours into the storm, there was a knock at the door that nearly made me jump out of my skin. Calling it a knock is generous. It was more like pounding, loud, aggressive. Whoever it was clearly didn't care that it was pouring rain. My heart started racing, and that awful pins and needles sensation flared up in my chest. After hesitating for a few seconds, I grabbed a flashlight and went to see who it was. I peeked through the small glass pane next to the door. It was Michelle. She was soaked to the bone and clutching a flashlight. I opened the door, and she spoke before I could even say hello. She blurted out that she'd seen someone near my woodpile and thought I should know. I was completely confused, but her words were alarming enough that I didn't question her right away. I stepped onto the porch and shined my flashlight into the rain, but I couldn't see anything, just trees. I asked if she was sure, and she nodded. Her eyes kept darting toward the woods, like she expected someone to step out at any second. The whole thing was unsettling. Between the darkness and the storm, there wasn't much I could make out. Before I could ask anything else, she told me to be careful, and started walking away without waiting for a response. I watched her disappear down the trail, completely unfazed by the rain. I stayed there until her flashlight faded from view, then went back inside. The moment I shut the door, something clicked. Her story didn't add up. How could she have seen someone near my woodpile if her cabin was 10 minutes away? That meant she had to be on my property already. And why would she be snooping around my cabin in the middle of a thunderstorm? Was she lying? None of it sat right with me. Still, marching over to her place during a storm wasn't happening. I locked the cabin as tightly as I could and sat in my bedroom, listening. Eventually, the storm began to die down, but my unease didn't. After a few quiet hours, I convinced myself it was probably safe to sleep. I don't remember the exact time, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of a branch snapping just outside my bedroom window. I'm a very light sleeper, and I was absolutely certain it was a branch snapping, not something else. I froze, listening. After a few tense seconds, I slowly crept toward the window, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. At first I didn't. Then I saw her. Michelle was standing at the edge of the woods, her body angled away from my house. I recognized her by her long, messy hair. I tried to make out more, but with only moonlight it was impossible. When I saw her start to turn around, I ducked below the window before she could catch me looking. I stayed crouched there for what felt like forever. When I finally worked up the courage to peek again, she was gone. I didn't know what to think. I hadn't considered her dangerous, just strange, but now I wasn't so sure. Why warn me earlier if she was the one lurking around? None of it made sense. I didn't sleep at all. I decided I'd stay awake until sunrise. Hours passed, and exhaustion started to creep in. Just as I began lowering my guard, there was another knock at the door. This one was quiet, controlled. Still, there was no way I was answering it. The pins and needles sensation returned as I quietly moved closer and peeked through the glass. I froze. It wasn't Michelle. It was a burly, bald man with a thick beard. I had to fight every instinct not to scream. The situation went from bad to terrifying in seconds. As quietly as possible, I backed away, locked myself in the bathroom, and called the police. While I was on the phone, I heard banging on the front door, like someone was smashing it with something heavy. The operator told me help was on the way and instructed me not to hang up. I sat there, more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. Eventually, the front door gave way. I heard it crash open. At that moment, I genuinely thought I was going to die. The man started destroying my cabin. At least, that's what it sounded like. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. I didn't make a sound. He never seemed to search for me because I never heard his footsteps leave the living room. After a while, the destruction stopped, and everything went silent. I'd been holding back a panic attack the entire time. To my surprise, the police arrived fairly quickly, just not fast enough to catch the man in the act. He was long gone. I begged the officers to help me, but they were completely useless. They did a half-hearted search of the surrounding area, and that was it. They wouldn't even agree to search the woods, saying it was too dense and that they were unlikely to find anyone there anyway. I pleaded with them to at least come with me to Michelle's cabin, and they reluctantly agreed. When we reached her property, my jaw literally dropped. The entire cabin was abandoned. The officers confirmed it and told me no one had lived there in decades. I told them they had to search it for squatters, but they refused. They said there were no clear signs of recent habitation and that searching it would be a waste of time. I nearly lost my mind when they said that. I tried to argue, but they basically told me that living in the woods was a risk I chose to take, and it wasn't their problem. Then they left. I was furious. I moved out of that cabin shortly after, but not before spending one more night there. It was miserable, but somehow nothing else happened. Things have been good for me since then, but I still think about that experience constantly. Some of my more superstitious friends have suggested that Michelle was actually a spirit trying to protect me, watching over my property for some reason. I don't believe in the paranormal. I think it's far more likely that two people, Michelle and that man, had been squatting in the abandoned cabin nearby. I still don't understand why they chose to target me, or why Michelle would bother warning me if she planned on breaking into my home later. I don't think I'll ever know. This happened in 2019. I was in my late 20s, living alone in a rental house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. It wasn't a fancy place, just an older, one-story house with creaky floors, thin walls, and a small backyard, but it was cheap. And it came with a basement, which I used to store extra furniture, tools, and stuff. I moved in that spring, and for the first few months, nothing strange happened. The house had its quirks. Some pipes rattled when you turned on the shower, and there was this one kitchen cabinet that always swung open on its own. But nothing unusual. For a place that old, the only part I didn't like was the basement. The door was in the hallway, next to the bathroom. It was heavy, and stuck a little when you opened it. And the light switch for the basement was actually halfway down the stairs, which meant you had to walk down a few steps in total darkness before you could reach it. The first time I went down there, I honestly felt weird. Not scared exactly, but uneasy. The single bulb didn't do much to light the corners, and the whole place smelled like old wood. But I didn't have any reason to be down there for long. So I stored my things, shut the door, and didn't think much of it. That changed around late October. I had just gotten home from work. I'm a night shift security guard, so I usually get home around 3 a.m. I was heading to the bathroom before bed when I heard something. It sounded like a faint knock, 3 soft taps. It came from behind the basement door. I froze in place. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the pipes or the house settling. But as I stood there holding my breath, I heard it again. 3 distinct knocks. I backed up a few steps and stared at the door, and then I waited. There was just silence now. I remember whispering to myself, "It's just the house," even though I didn't really believe it. I didn't open the door. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and stayed awake for the next 2 hours listening. Eventually, I fell asleep, with the TV on. The next morning, I checked the basement. I opened the door, went down the stairs, and turned on the light. Everything was exactly the way I left it. No signs of anyone having been down there, no footprints in the dust, no broken windows. I convinced myself it had to be the house shifting, or maybe a small animal that got in somehow. I moved on, but a few nights later, it happened again. This time I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard the knock. Not 3 taps this time, just 1, but it was loud, and it was close, like someone had used their knuckles, hard, against the basement door. I opened the bathroom door and looked. The basement door was closed. Nothing moved. The hallway was quiet. I walked over and put my ear against the wood. At first I heard nothing, but then I was very faint. I heard what sounded like breathing. Slow, steady, as if someone was standing on the other side, waiting. I backed away and went to my room again, locking the door. I called my landlord. I told him something strange was going on in the basement, that I thought someone had maybe gotten into the house somehow. He seemed skeptical, but said he'd come by to check it out. When he arrived in the morning, we both went down into the basement together. He looked around, checked the windows, the walls, even the foundation. Nothing was damaged, nothing was broken, no signs of a break-in or animals. I didn't say anything. I couldn't explain what I was hearing, and I didn't want to sound crazy. For the next week, things were quiet. I started to think maybe I was just overtired or imagining things. I was working too much after all. But then one night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting on my couch watching TV when I heard the basement door creak. Not a knock, not a slam, but a creak, like it was slowly swinging open. I sat up straight and turned off the volume. I could hear it, a slow, grinding creak of the hinges moving. I got up and peeked down the hallway. The basement door was wide open. I hadn't opened it in over a week. I hadn't even touched it. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward it. I didn't have a weapon, but I had no choice. I had to know what was going on. I stood at the top of the stairs and shined the light down. The basement was pitch black. The bulb wasn't on. I reached around the corner and flicked the switch. Nothing. It was dead. The bulb must have burned out. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They weren't rushing. They were slow. But they were definitely footsteps. I backed away. My hands were shaking. I slammed the door shut and held the handle tight. For a moment, I felt the pressure of something on the other side, like it was leaning against the door. Then it stopped. I locked the door and called the police. I told them someone was in my basement. They showed up about 10 minutes later. 2 officers cleared the house and went down into the basement. I stood in the front yard waiting, and after what felt like forever, they came back up. They said they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. No one is hiding. Nothing was even disturbed. One of them even tried to laugh it off, asking if I'd been watching scary movies. I knew what I heard. After they left, I didn't go back inside right away. I just stood there, staring at that house. Finally, I went back in, locked every door and window, and stayed up until the sun came up. That morning, I bought a padlock and installed it on the basement door. I didn't care if it was allowed or not. I needed it. For the next month, the basement stayed quiet. No sounds, no knocks, nothing. I almost let myself relax. Then one night, I got home from work and noticed the basement door was open. Not just unlocked, open. The padlock was lying on the floor, broken. The door itself was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched that door in weeks. I stood there staring at it, and for the first time, I realized something. Every time this had happened, every noise, every knock, it had always been at night when I was alone. I didn't go down. I couldn't. I packed a bag, left the house, and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. When I came back, I literally nailed the basement door shut. I even wedged a chair against it. I didn't care if the landlord got mad. I just couldn't look at that door anymore. A few nights later, Around 3 a.m., I was lying in bed when I heard a sound I still can't explain. It was a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even someone speaking, just the faint, low rumble of someone's vocal cords. It came from somewhere beneath the floorboards, directly under my bed. That was it. I called the police again. They showed up, did their search, and nothing turned up. Again. So I packed everything, minus the stuff in the basement, and I left. I didn't even wait for the lease to end. I don't know what was in that basement. I don't want to know. All I can say is, sometimes, when I lie awake at night in my new apartment, I think about all this, and I wonder if I'd waited just a little longer, what would have come up in those steps?